Hello, friends, and welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association, where we aim to change the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. We are also on Sirius XM Channel 130. Of course, our radio show is always a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org/podcasts or directly to wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm your hostess, Dr. Gracie Christie, and joining us next is Damien O'Connor. He's the Knights of Columbus Vice President of Evangelization and Faith Formation. Welcome to the show, Damien.
Thanks so much. It's good to be back.
Here on Conversations with Consequences, we try to highlight the work of the Knights of Columbus. Whenever we get an opportunity or there's an inflection point. So that point right now is your yearly convention that's taking place in Quebec City this year. I've had the privilege of going to one of your conventions. I think it was in Baltimore some years ago, and it's a really spectacular time. And tell us how it went this past week in Quebec.
Well, first, thank you again for having me. It's very special to have our convention because in many ways it's a reunion. You know, we all come together from around the world. And this year we're also celebrating, or Quebec is celebrating 350th anniversary of the church here, of the First Archdiocese. And believe it or not, that actually encompassed a good portion of the United States, but specifically New Haven, Connecticut, where we're from. So it's, in a sense, we're coming home to our very first archdiocese.
Wait,
so,
Damien, I'm sorry. Explain that to us. What does Quebec have to do with Connecticut?
Well, when New France was founded here in Quebec, the first archdiocese was a massive territory, and so part of that territory included Connecticut, where our headquarters is.
Oh,
and so, in many ways, it's like coming home to Quebec for their 350th anniversary. So it's just very special to be here.
Oh, that's really lovely. And 300 years of Catholic history there.
350, yeah.
350. And then you have the Knights that don't have a very short history either. You've been around for a long time doing a lot of good. Give us a real short history of the Knights of Columbus for our listeners.
Sure, and thank you for that question. We've existed for 142 years, and we are founded by Blessed Michael McGivney in New Haven, Connecticut. And at that time, there was a lot of anti-Catholicism that was going on, very similar to today in some ways.
Yeah.
And early on, when the husband would pass away, their wives and the mothers and the children would struggle terribly. Father McGivney, a parish priest, a very good parish priest, wanted to find something to counter all the other secular kind of clubs and men's groups that were out there, and started the Knights of Columbus. And his main focus was really two things. It was to help the widows and orphans financially, but secondly, he cared deeply about the formation of men. And you see that from the very beginning in all his writings and those who even wrote about him. So it's interesting that he wasn't looking for formed men, if that makes sense. He was looking to form men in the faith to help them, because that obviously not only affected their family, but it affected the parish and the community greatly.
Damien, you're talking about working class people in Connecticut 140 years ago, Irish people mostly, I suppose, in that area. Right. I can imagine, right, a man putting in 14 hours at the mill, right, coming home dead tired every evening, and then Friday night rolls around, and where does he go? He goes to the pub, right? He goes to the local bar, and that's a place of release and companionship. And so this is my impression. Tell me if I'm wrong about Blessed Father McGivney. He wanted to give working class Catholic men another reason to get together besides beer and a kind of companionship that was leading them upwards and outwards to better things.
I would agree with that. At a basic level, I would absolutely agree with that. And 2 years ago, we started an initiative called COR, C-O-R, Latin for heart. It's very similar to what McGivney did. We're simply being more intentional about it all these years later. And it creates the space, just like McGivney did, where men can come together. Any man in the parish, by the way, you don't have to be a knight. And it's where they can receive prayer, formation, and just healthy fraternity together. Glory to God, it's absolutely taken off in these last 2 years. We just had over 1,000 new members join because they asked to join because they went to COR at their particular parish.
You know, I've been married for 30 years myself, and my husband, I've been, watching my husband over the years as we grow old together. And I find that men have a deep need for male companionship, and many men are very lonely. And even many men that you think, right, you look at their lives from the outside, they're busy professionals and they have beautiful families and all that, but even those men are lonely. Is that what CORE is? Besides formation, CORE is trying to relieve that in a way that's beautiful and healthy.
Yes, absolutely, and it's part of it. It's also regarding prayer. It's not, and there's nothing wrong with Hail Mary, but it's not just a quick Hail Mary. It's more substantial prayer time together, and there's the ratio can change depending on what the parish needs. But what you just said is not just an opinion. The statistics back that up. That so many men do not have just quality friendships with other Catholic men. And while we don't like to talk about it because it doesn't sound very masculine to us men, a lot of men are very lonely. They just are. And so we're just finding that this simple idea, and it really is simple, is regarding CORE, is it works because it resonates with them, and they're also encountering Christ through this time together. That creates a ripple effect that can't be measured.
Oh, and how do people access CORE?
The easiest thing to get more information is, and not just to plug our website, but it is right there. It's kofc.org/core. And then there's all the resources are there, and there's really a substantial amount of new resources that councils can use and parishes can use to facilitate that. Because not they may hear this right now and say, well, I'm not really comfortable leading like a men's small group. And you don't really have to be a strong leader in that category because we just walk you through it. It's very spoon-fed, easy to do. Even the guys that say, oh, this will never work, have now come around because they just love it. And it's very fulfilling. And glory to God, we've had a lot of converts.
I bet.
Men that were not Catholic that came and they said, I just love this.
I've noticed in my environment, women have so many things. We have so many irons on the fire, right? We have 1,000 ways that we interact with each other and form relationships. But men don't have so much of that outside of sports. I know that my husband, now that he's that we don't have little children, he used to do a lot of little league and coaching, and he got so much happiness out of that with the other dads, right? And then that's gone. So how wonderful that CORE is taking off and filling that need for men, and then making them converts and men of prayer and men of family. That's really beautiful.
And if I may, the other thing that we try to do, we're trying our very best to I don't want to say enforce, but let's say it's the prayer time of CORE. And then maybe it's because I'm a former teacher. Don't assume the men know the prayers. Don't assume they've had formation before. And it's okay. We're not dumbing it down, but let's say I'm leading the rosary at CORE, then we're going to hand out guides to the rosary. We're going to hand out the rosaries. And if I'm leading it, I'm going to hold that guide too, because it makes them feel more comfortable. Everyone is using this guide to how to pray the rosary. And I know it sounds like a little thing, but it actually makes a big difference to make men comfortable if maybe they've never prayed the rosary before, or maybe we're going to adoration. But point is that we teach them and don't assume anymore. And if they've heard it before, so they hear it again. But that's been really important too, to make them feel comfortable, because they might not know the faith as best as they think they should.
Damien, I promise we're going to get to the convention, but I have a question for you. I was reading the other day about the way that Boy Scouts have added, they've taken out the boy out of Boy Scouts, and now it's co-ed. And it made me think about the Knights of Columbus and how the Knights of Columbus is an organization for men. And I want to hear from you what your thoughts are about that. Why is it important to have an organization just for men?
I guess it's easy to think, if you look at it, if you've never heard of the Knights of Columbus, that it's anti-women or anti-family, and it's quite the opposite. We believe that iron sharpens iron, and so men need to be with other men. For example, you could have a prayer group with men and women, but you could ask most women or most men, they would usually say, yeah, I would prefer just to be with men, or I prefer just to be with women, because it is a different dynamic. And I won't get into specifics now, but we can all imagine there's some very difficult topics that could possibly come up that you would only feel comfortable talking about that, me as a man, with other men, if that makes sense. Maybe it's some personal struggles or something like that. And it's not just like it's about therapy, but it is important for the men to be with the men. And we are very much a family organization as well. And that's important to stress too. If you look at all of our programs, they're titled Faith in Action programs, every single one of them the family can participate, and we encourage that. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to learning about the faith and praying together in a small group setting, yes, we very much focus on men, and it's been extremely effective for us. I mean, just at this convention here, when you're 3,000 people, and you see this camaraderie, this fraternity, but it's with the men, but also with all these families here, most of which paid their own way to come. It's really very moving to see that here.
Do you find that that men together, when they're on their own without the female sex, do you think that there is it's easier to concentrate and build on those beautiful masculine type virtues that really make the world go round, right? That kind of protectiveness and courage and that nobility of character that we can all imagine when we imagine the perfect man, right? Do you think that that's easier to build that kind of, to help build or inform those kind of men with when you're in a single sex space?
I do, absolutely, without a doubt. And it's not just opinion for me. I've experienced this over the last many years. It absolutely works when it's the men together. And sometimes we have to encourage each other, and sometimes we have to challenge each other. Mm-hmm. And it's not as comfortable when there's women with us, or if my wife is there. And my wife would be the first one to tell you, I don't want to be in your men's group.
Yeah, I agree.
We also communicate differently.
Yeah, men are very different when they talk to each other, right? They can be a little rough, and no one cries.
That's right. And there's nothing wrong with crying, and sometimes that does happen, to be honest. But it is a different dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's different, and it has its own beauty, right? And it's a beauty that maybe in so many parts of our culture we've abandoned in favor of sort of a more feminine template of how to interact.
That's right. That's exactly right. And yet we'll bust on each other and all these things that guys do. And my wife is always like, I don't know why you guys do that. I'm like, because we're different, huh?
It reminds me of my sons in Catholic boys' school. The stories they come home with, and I think, oh, it's a good thing that your teachers and the brothers there, they know how to deal with boys. They know how to channel all that energy right into the right channels, right?
My son, it's a very quick story. My son, who's now 24, but when he was in high school, he joined the wrestling team, and he's also on the autism spectrum. And my wife saw him, the guys were kind of busting on him, and they're rolling around on the mats, just being goofy. And she said she thought they were being mean to him. And I said, no, hon, they love him. This is guys being guys. And it was true. And they're, to this day, not to deflect this conversation, but they're still his close friends to this day, because he learned friendship by being on this team with them. And we just act differently. We communicate differently. So, yeah, thank you for letting me share that.
No, that's a great story. Anecdote. I have stories like that too of my sons coming. One time my son came home with a black eye. And I said, what happened? He goes, no, Mom, I deserved it. I was being really annoying to the seniors on the bus. And I said, okay, you know what?
Yep, I understand.
And I said, you know what? We're going to leave it at that. I'm not going to make a fuss. You're probably better off. You're a better young man with your black eye.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love this. I love the Knights of Columbus. I happen to know a lot about the Knights because I've interviewed several of you and you before, and I have a beautiful book about the beginning of the Knights, of the inception and Blessed Father McGivney, and it's really a lovely testament to the kind of sort of that civic society that you hope will always endure, right? That people can come together at the grassroots level and build beautiful things, like without bothering the government about it or needing tax monies or big buildings. You're able to build something gorgeous that then endures and keeps creating beauty for 140 years in the case of the Knights. Yeah.
One of the things that, there's a couple things. Obviously, the most important is that we do understand we're powerless without God. And so our faith and our prayer life is super important to those that are true Knights, that really understand who we are, that are really trying to live it. That's so important. But secondly, and maybe this is just my own opinion, but just working here and then being a knight, in my own parish, it's, you'll often hear, what's the knight's response to such and such in the news, because we're a huge organization. And in my opinion, you often won't hear us give some formal opinion on whatever the issue is, for the most part, because we just keep moving forward. We just keep living our faith. And most importantly, we're in service to the church, and unapologetically. So we just keep moving forward, and there's stability in that. And we're a trusted organization, because no matter what, we are going to serve the church. Plain and simple. Put a period at the end of that sentence. And when you stay focused like that, it provides that longevity. You might see some religious orders kind of lose their way. They lose their charism. We try or strive to, and I know we probably screw up once in a while, but we strive to stay focused on serving the church and moving forward. And it's a discipline that's not easy at times, but I'm very proud that we've been quite successful at it for 142 years.
Let's turn to the conference in Quebec. You highlighted many of the. I got a long email about it, and I sat down and I read the whole thing, and there were you highlighted several. You highlighted men doing special things, projects of that from different sections of your chapters. I think chapters of your group, and also even families, like spectacular families. One that really took my eye, took my attention, was a family of 11 children, several of them adopted with disabilities,
That's correct.
Like Down syndrome. Oh, that was beautiful. And just a picture of the family standing on stage. It moved me so much. I can't remember their name right now, but maybe you can tell us. And so
the Ampe family, AMPE.
Yeah. AMPE. Beautiful, beautiful. And I was thinking, what's the purpose for the Knights of highlighting these beautiful things? You must have a special purpose that's not just like self-congratulations.
Sure. So we have I mentioned the faith and action programs earlier. And so those categories are faith, family, community, and life. And so we always focus, we give an award. It's kind of it's quite a process. It's done at our jurisdictions first, and then there's a winner at that level, and then it gets up to our level and at the spring convention. And so we honor who really focused on the faith the most, or community, one of the community programs. But we always have a family of the year that just exemplifies in just an incredible witness to being a Catholic family. And so it's one of my favorite parts of the whole of the week that we're here, or the days that we're here, is whoever that family is going to be, because they always, as you saw, they're read, they get up and they tell their story. And gosh, is that inspiring. This family, they, I hope I get this number right, but I believe they have 11 children, and I believe 4 of them are adopted, and the 4 have special needs. And as I said, I have special needs children. So it's very emotional for me watching this. But let's be clear. Our children, they were born this way. We didn't choose them. This family is incredible. The parents chose these children with special needs because no one else wanted them. That's an incredible witness. That incredible.
And you know what it does for people who see that? They see the possibilities that might open up before them, right? Of being, of being bigger and better and nobler, because sometimes you just don't even believe things are possible, right? Like you say, no, well, I can barely get by with the chaos at home and all the plates I have flashing through the air that I'm trying to keep aloft. And then you say, no, if they can do that, then maybe I can do a little more, right? I can try a little harder.
Yeah. And we've learned in our own family, it's really difficult when you get these diagnoses, obviously. But the line that I use is, we had to mourn what we thought they would become. You have to mourn it first, so that we could then see the gift from God that's right in front of us.
Oh, because that's so pretty.
We all
that's
have
so true.
When you're parents, we have this vision before they're born and what it's going to be like, and it's never like that,
Never.
And it's trials and tribulations and all kinds of stuff happens. And this family clearly knows it, the one that just won this award. They know that their children are living icons of Christ right in front of us. But you have to let go what you thought they were going to become, because there's a gift right there. And I say that as someone who struggled with this for a while. And now we've, finally come around years later, like, God, our kids are just gifts. They really are.
And God, I believe that God wraps the biggest gifts in the hardest to penetrate packaging, right? Like,
Amen.
Like those are the best gifts, right? The ones that aren't obvious, the ones that you have to dig a little, the ones that you have to get to know and live in and unwrap, right? Like we unwrap our children, right? Our children come to us how they come. And then one day you say, oh, all those things that I thought were problems, those are the joys that God sent me.
Amen. That's right. That's exactly right.
Tell us some other people or projects that you highlighted, that you awarded, that you gave awards to at the ceremony, at the convention.
So the other one I'll share, it's called the McGivney Award, and that's for, it sounds funny, but it's the, I don't want to say number one, but it's a state chaplain. So every jurisdiction, let's say Nevada or New York or the Philippines, they have a state chaplain. And so Father Chad Wilhelm, who's from the state and jurisdiction of North Dakota, he won it this year. And he is an incredible Knight of Columbus and witness to the faith. He's 27 years in a row been their state, 28 years, been their state chaplain.
No way.
And he is an incredible recruiter. I mean, he loves McGivney. And when he gave his speech, he's talking about all these different places where he's chaplain, in addition to the Knights of Columbus. Like, he's just a true man of faith. And so huge honor for him to get that. And I very shamelessly checked to see if there was room at his table, because we had what's called the State's dinner last night. Huge dinner with all 3,000 people here. And there was room. So I just loved hanging out with him, because he and I are fairly good friends. And I'm just so happy for him, and he deserves it. He really does. Oh,
he sounds spectacular. How wonderful to have that kind of reach, right? And then, and he probably only sleeps 3 or 4 hours a night, it sounds like.
I would imagine. Yeah. He's incredible.
You say that the Knights stay out of politics or the flashpoints of politics going on. But right now we're looking at, we have elections coming up, and as Catholics, the pro-life position means a lot to us on a political sense, right? Because our votes translate into actual lives and deaths when it comes to the unborn and other life issues. But those things seem to be tied in together, right? Like if you're really pro-abortion, you're also probably pretty pro-euthanasia or assisted suicide. There's sort of a lack of respect for life in general, or vulnerable life in general. The Knights have done so much to advance the pro-life cause. And one thing that you've done that means a lot to me, and I wonder if you talked about it at the convention, if you highlighted it, is the ultrasound machines for the pregnancy care centers, and how important that work is, and how we should think about that when we go to the voting booths. Sure.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, we are unapologetically pro-life, and we're almost near, believe it or not, 2,000 ultrasound machines.
2,000.
I remember when we hit 1,000, and I was super impressed. And we're getting to 2,000 much quicker than I anticipated. So what does that mean? I think that means that more and more people are, especially our councils, are trying very hard to put these machines where they need to be. And there's story after story after story of a mother, or maybe her mother and the husband, just being deeply moved by seeing their child in that ultrasound. And it's extremely effective. And we also have now what's called our ASAP program, aid and I forget the full name now, but the ASAP is to help families after the birth. Because, sometimes you'll hear in the pro-life movement, well, you're not really helping them once the baby is born. But we most certainly are. And so we're focusing on that as well. And I thank you for bringing that up.
Is that a parish-based program, or how does ASAP work? I guess we can read about it on your website also.
Sure. No, ASAP it's through our councils.
Oh, through the councils, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds so crucial nowadays. People are struggling so much to make ends meet.
Oh, 100%. And I'm so proud of us for doing that as well. And obviously I'm biased, but it's just important, and we do stand with you. We will be there for you, and and let's face it, when a lot of these, and I think you know this, but when let's say a woman goes to Planned Parenthood, their slogan's pro-choice, but the reality is they actually go there feeling like they have no choice at all. And they do have another choice.
That is so true. It's Planned Parenthood is a swallower of hope. It just says, come here and lose all hope.
Yeah, and it's very easy to get maybe angry at women that go there. No, but I also think we have to go a little bit deeper and say, well, they're often desperate, and don't know what else to do.
Well, and they've grown up in a debased culture, so degrading them from day one, and all 100%. Of them are victims of this sad cycle of just this disgraceful cycle, of a lack of human dignity, a acknowledgement of human dignity that we've all been sort of born into, right? If we weren't born in the 40s. We've all sort of been imbibing this in the culture. I'm so glad that the Knights of Columbus is there on both ends, at the ultrasound end and then after the baby's born, to help pick up the pieces and get that young family started down the right path. Well, congratulations to you and the Knights for another wonderful year. And tell us again the website so our listeners can learn more about the Knights and how they can join a chapter.
It's KofC.org.
Thank you, Damien.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Gracie Christie, and joining me now is my colleague at the Catholic Association, Ashley McGuire. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Hey, Gracie. It's always awesome to be talking with you.
Super fun to talk to you always, and we have so much to talk about again, because just a couple days ago, Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, she has picked Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, for her running mate, possibly to be our vice president in a few more months. And this makes the Kamala Harris, Tim Walz ticket maybe the most anti-Catholic ticket in the history of the United States. Could that possibly be true?
People are saying that, but let's not forget we had Obama, Biden, Biden, Harris. I mean,
they've got to go really far to get the top billing, right?
Yeah, but it's just so sad and pathetic that it's just like they keep outdoing themselves in terms of how bigoted. But I do think there's some truth to that, because Kamala Harris is particularly anti-Catholic. I know we've talked about that, but let's just say that it's a very bad ticket for Catholics who value our faith.
Well, so easy pickings, right? The low hanging fruit is their complete devotion to abortion, right? I mean, and I think they're neck and neck. They're two people who believe in abortion in a way that it sort of makes your skin crawl, because I know a lot of pro-choice people. My husband's family they're atheists and pro-choice. They're also really good people, and they have subtlety, and they'll say, well, in this case, I think it's okay. And in that case, that would be wrong. And I don't detect that from either Harris or Walz.
Yeah, I think we've had a couple weeks now to look at Kamala Harris's record on abortion, and we know that she's, as extreme as they get, and that she, tried to wipe out pregnancy centers, and she prosecuted David Deladine, the citizen journalist, to expose Planned Parenthood. But I was shocked to read in the National Review really excellent reporting on Walz and the way that he, to your point that there's most Americans, even pro-choice Americans, have a very centrist view on abortion.
And they can be subtle, Ashley. They can be subtle and they can be thoughtful and they can say, well, that's an ugly way to go down that path. And here's a way that seems more just to me, right? I know lots of people like that.
Right. And he is managing a Midwestern state where, they had kind of a lot of common sense regulations that, protected women's health and safety, protect unborn babies.
Protected parental consent.
Right. And the things that his party stripped away and that he helped to oversee are stunning. Stuff about stripping away informing women that they have the right to withdraw their consent, stripping away laws and regulations that make sure women aren't coerced into abortion. I mean,
one thing that apparently he hated very much, and he made sure to get rid of it in 2023, was there was a Born Alive Infant Act or law in force in Minnesota because if a little baby survives a botched abortion, right? If the abortionist is incompetent, like most abortionists, and the baby gets away, then you have a little child squalling and struggling, right, on a stretcher. And it makes sense that child should be assisted. So he made away with that law in May of 2023. And since then, I've read credible reports that 5 to 6 babies have been born alive and then allowed to expire without being offered aid. Just the most basic aid you'd give a human being who's gasping for air.
Yeah. No, he made his state a haven for Gosnell type abortionists. And
exactly.
And it's so extreme. And, we've talked about, you and I have written about this really heartbreaking study that came out in the last year showing that the overwhelming majority of women who have abortions didn't want to. And something like 2 in 3 of them felt coerced into having their abortion. So the fact that he was content and gave his governor's stamp of approval to laws that stripped away regulations that made sure women aren't coerced into abortion, I mean, that opens the door for human trafficking.
He basically took a broom and just swept away every possible common sense regulation or protection around a procedure that everybody understands is very consequential, and it's a procedure that women and girls turn to at crisis points in their lives, when they're vulnerable, when they're in fear, when they're nauseous, right? Like, these are not procedures that should be thrown out there and accessible freely, and also administered by unscrupulous actors that we know are in it, to rake in the big bucks. So he took a broom and he swept everything away. Maybe our listeners don't know, and we should mention it, that he passed a law. He helped pass a law, and he signed it, and he helped, drum it through the legislature that made abortion for any reason at all legal in his state for the 40 weeks of pregnancy. And then he turned around and passed more laws that swept away whatever little protections were left, like the Infant Born Alive Act and the law against coercing women. What else? Parental consent. I mean, just tremendous. And let's not forget, before, maybe we talk a lot on the show about abortion because we're so pro-life and we each have 5 children and we love children. But let's not forget the transgender ideology component of the Walz administration. What do you know about that?
Well, I just know that, he's very much in lockstep with the gender ideology movement. And, we're watching the Olympics right now. And, like women's sports, for example, this is something that ordinary Americans of almost all stripes agree should be protected. Mm-hmm. And so, I think we can be certain that he's somebody who is not going to defend women's sports and is going to be whipped around by a movement that, frankly, doesn't have concern for women, for women's safety, for women's rights, and
the children.
Well, and religious liberty too. This is a real clash point between our faith and the current culture, which is that our faith teaches us that men and women are different, that we're created in the image of God, and that that gender ideology is a real affront to our faith because it suggests the opposite. It suggests that God didn't have a divine plan, that we, aren't complementary or equal in that complementarity. But it's also a movement that is constantly threatening the religious liberty of our schools, of our churches, of our institutions, and threatens our daughters.
Even, as people of religion, we especially hold on to the truth, right? Like for us, Jesus is the truth. So for us to have to live in a state or a country in which you're not able to freely express the truth at school, for instance, when you're teaching children and you have to teach them lies, which is basically what happens when you live under a state governance that insists that transgender ideology has to be taught and you have to stick to that. You're literally dabbling in lies all day long. And so, forgetting there's important complementarity and how God made us so beautifully, but it's also pure lies, and lies are of the evil one.
Right. Well, and let's not forget that Walz would work for Harris, and she has been both the sponsor of multiple bills that would directly threaten the religious liberty of the Catholic Church and its myriad institutions in this country on this particular issue. Mm-hmm. So, they pose a acute and a direct threat, a religious liberty threat to the church, I think. And again, I know we're talking about Walz, but let's not forget that Harris is somebody who thinks that, Catholic doctors should be forced to perform abortions. You think Walz is not going to line up in lockstep with her on that?
No
question.
I'm 100% sure that he thinks that's a great plan.
This is the way the party works on these issues is you line up and you march in lockstep, and their party is totally out of step with average Americans on these issues. And again, they pose a direct threat to the conscience rights of Catholic healthcare workers, of Catholic teachers in parochial schools.
Well, what about Catholic parents who could have their children taken from them if they
parental rights?
Yeah, parental rights,
or just the basic parental rights of parents. In Montgomery County, Maryland, where I live, there's a huge lawsuit going on right now over whether or not religious parents, and it's not just Catholics. I mean, they're being joined by Muslims and evangelicals who want to opt their children out, the basic right to be informed of when their children are going to be taught as young as kindergarten, sexually explicit gender ideology material, and want to opt them out. And the Montgomery County Public School District is digging in their heels. And again, you can be absolutely sure that a Walz Harris ticket is going to take that national.
Yeah, I'm 100% sure of that. That is very scary. You know what else is scary? And Walz has spoken out on this topic is the border. And as Catholics, obviously, we feel very strongly that the stranger must be welcomed. But a border, the way the border is being run right now, is a danger to every single person that approaches it, that crosses it. People who live on the American side who are having cartels trafficking people and drugs across their front yards, the fentanyl that pours in, the girls who are being trafficked across the border for sex purposes. I mean, there's so much horror going on across our southern border, and both of these politicians feel very strongly that should continue, as far as I can tell. Walz talked about building them ladders. And I guess when he says them, he's talking about the drug cartels and the sex traffickers.
No, and our church, you're right. The Catholic Church emphasizes the the need to welcome the migrant and the stranger, but it also teaches that nations have a right to their own sovereignty. And the issue of how to manage a border is something that it relegates to lawmakers, and lawmakers in the Democratic Party have obstructed any attempt to secure the border in the most basic of ways, as you point out, to prevent nefarious actors who, whether it's terrorists or drug dealers or human traffickers, from entering our country and exploiting our people, including exploiting the immigrants who are coming here seeking a better life, who just want to feed their children. These people exploit them too.
Yeah, they're the first ones. Child labor has gone up since the border was open. Children are being brought across that border and put to work. Illegal child labor. And don't even get me started on the sex trafficking, because that just makes me insanely upset that we could basically, hold up a sign and say, here, traffic across our border, because we have lots of rich Americans who are willing to pay high prices. I mean, just terrible. The amount of the fear, that one fears when you see a possible Harris-Walz combination ticket. You know what? I did some research because I've been writing a piece on pregnancy care centers. I'm the director of the Archdiocese of Miami Centers, and I read their ultrasounds. And Tim Walz, one of the things that he did, that he was very eager to do, was to take away any state funding from the pregnancy care centers in Minnesota. And that was just a holy grail for him, and he succeeded in 2023.
Yeah, no, for all their talk about choice, the left seems very intent on removing the other choice for women who are contemplating abortion, which is to choose life, and all the wonderful pregnancy centers that want to walk right up and help women to make the choice that we know they actually want to make, which is to have their child and to support them. And and it's shameful. And I think by choosing him, Kamala Harris is showing what kind of administration she would run, which is one that's anti-life, anti-family, and anti-Catholicism.
Do you think that Catholics in general are understanding these subtleties? I find that I worry that because the mainstream media is so adulatory and so they're so excited about the Harris-Walz team that a lot of people are maybe not hearing these important things that important to all Americans, not just Catholics, and as you say, not just pro-life Americans, right? Even pro-choice Americans have a lot to worry about with this. Yeah,
couple. No, pro common sense Americans.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a concern, but thankfully we live in an era where there's more ways to get to consume information than just the major news outlets. And, I guess you and I have our work cut out for us between now and November.
Yes, we do. So thank you so much, Ashley, for joining me. And I hope that all our listeners gleaned a lot of information about this very important topic. And we'll continue looking at that as the months go on.
Thanks, Gracie.
Every morning, the Catholic Association reviews all the latest news and sends our subscribers a carefully curated collection of the most important news of the day. Items are specifically selected for a smart Catholic audience like you. Don't let the world take you by surprise. Subscribe to our daily media roundup at thecatholicassociation.org. Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. It's the end of summertime, and we look around, and in our own homes and on our streets, people are coming back to start the new school year, saying goodbye to the happy and pleasant semi-relaxation of summer because all of us have busy lives. The new traffic, right, that starts when the kids go back to school and you have to struggle harder to get to work and come back from work as the traffic gets worse. It occurred to me that it's a wonderful time to think about how to have a really good plan of life to sustain us spiritually every day as we deal with all the complications of all our very complicated lives. For me, a plan of life has to do with having a daily, several times a day, contact with God in various different ways, like daily mass and a daily rosary, and a time for spiritual reading, a time for meditative prayer. And that sounds like a lot to stuff into an already busy life, but in my experience, it's been something that has become indispensable in order to do everything else in my life that has to get done properly, with peace, with a really strong and present knowledge of my daughterness to God, right? That I am God's daughter, just like all of you are, or God's son, and how important that is to keep front and center as we face the rest of this year, which is going to be a difficult year because of elections and all the ways that difficulties assail us. And now Father Roger Landry offers us, as is customary, a short and inspiring homily to prepare us for this Sunday's Gospel.
This is Father Roger Landry, and it's a privilege for me to be with you as we enter into the consequential conversation the risen Lord Jesus wants to have with each of us this Sunday, in which we will go more deeply into the third week of Jesus' 5-week course on the mystery of his body and blood in the Holy Eucharist, which Jesus taught for the first time in the synagogue of Capernaum and renews for us every third summer. The timing this year is particularly appropriate as we seek to profit more deeply from and share in the ongoing Eucharistic revival renewing the Church in the United States. 2 weeks ago, we had the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves and fish, which is a foreshadowing of the multiplication of the meal of the Last Supper throughout every land and time to feed the spiritually famished human race. Last Sunday, Jesus told us not to work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life that he would give us. And in response to the crowds asking him to one-up Moses in the desert, who gave them manna from heaven every day for 40 years, Jesus told them that it wasn't Moses who gave them the manna, but God the Father who gives them the true manna. This Sunday, Jesus continues that consequential conversation, which gets into the heart of his teaching on his self-gift to us in the Holy Eucharist, on the faith we need to believe in his Eucharistic presence, and in the opposition his teaching on the Eucharist has received from the beginning. Let's take each part in turn. First, Jesus emphasized more deeply how he is the true manna, the nourishment God the Father provides for us in the desert of life until we reach the eternal promised land. I am the bread that came down from heaven, he tells us. And then he adds, I am the bread of life. It's a basic truth that we become what we eat, and Jesus foretelling that when we consume him, we become one with his life. Since he is eternal, to consume him is to receive everlasting life. He tells us, your ancestors ate the manna in the desert, but they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven so that one may eat it and not die. Then he specified even more. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever, and the bread I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. These are extraordinary words, which we shouldn't water down or pass over. First, they sound cannibalistic, as if Jesus is saying that we need to eat him the way we consume animals, or animals consume carcasses. Of course, that's not what his words mean. We're not killing Jesus in order to consume his flesh like cannibals do. He's giving us, under the miraculous appearances of bread and wine, his entire body, blood, soul, and divinity. Second, once we let those words of his sink in, we get to Jesus' mind-blowing promise that when we eat him, we will not die but live forever. He swears an oath and says, whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him on the last day. And he tells us why. Because whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me and I in him. He tries to explain this mystery by analogy to his own relationship to God the Father. Just as the living Father sent me and I have life because of the Father, so also the one who feeds on me will have life because of me. The upshot of this deep mystery is that by receiving Holy Communion, by eating Jesus' body and drinking his blood, his life becomes the principle of our life. We draw our life from him just as he draws his life from the Father. And since his life is eternal, death for us will just be a passage into a new and permanent form of life, in communion with him who has triumphed over death and holds all life in existence. There are two responses to Jesus' words. One is doubt. We see it first in the passage this Sunday, when the crowds murmured, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph? Do we not know his father and mother? Then how can he say, I have come down from heaven? To them, Jesus was basically a preaching carpenter from Nazareth, and they questioned his credentials. Afterward, as we'll hear next Sunday, the crowds questioned the substance of his remarks, quarreling, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" And later in a passage we will consider in 2 weeks, they'll say, "This saying is hard, who can accept it?" We shouldn't dismiss these objections because many of our contemporaries will raise the same ones. Jesus makes huge claims, both about his origin as well as our destiny through the gift of the Eucharist he gives. The only way either of them could make sense is if Jesus were truly far more than a man, if he were God who had come down from heaven, and if through consuming his flesh and blood we would be doing more than eating cells with 46 chromosomes, but coming into contact with divine life itself. That's why we need to pass to the second response to Jesus' words, precisely faith. Jesus said to the doubting crowds, "Stop murmuring among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draw him, and I will raise him on the last day." To believe in his words, Jesus says, we must be drawn by God the Father. We need the gift of divine grace. Jesus continues, "It's written in the prophets, they shall all be taught by God. Everyone who listens to my Father and learns from him comes to me." God the Father wants to teach us, but we need to listen and learn from him. That's the fundamental openness of faith, that we're docile to God and his teaching, that we allow him to stretch us beyond our human categories, that we trust in his ability to do what by human experience is simply impossible and therefore miraculous. Jesus' listeners at the time did not realize that God the Father had drawn them to his Son right there in the Capernaum synagogue, that he was attempting to teach them right then and there through Jesus. But they were resistant to listening and learning. They needed to learn how to trust in Jesus enough to trust in his words. Words that would only make better sense a year later, when during the next Passover, Jesus would take bread and wine into his hands and totally transform them into his body and blood under the appearances of human food and say, "Take and eat, this is my body, and take and drink, this is the chalice of my blood." Faith, however, involves this trust. As St. Thomas Aquinas wrote for us in his famous Adoro Te Devote for the first Corpus Christi celebration 760 years ago, "I believe whatever the Son of God has said, because nothing is truer than the word of truth." Drawn by the Father, listening and learning as he sought to teach us through Jesus, we trust in what Jesus says, because we trust in him, the one sent by God the Father. We'll have a chance to enter more deeply into Jesus' challenging words again over the next 2 weeks. But for now, we need to ensure that this conversation with Jesus is truly consequential. Consequential in allowing God the Father to draw us toward his Son in the Holy Eucharist. Consequential in having us truly listen to him and learn from him as he seeks to draw us into the greatest mystery of salvation history of all. It wasn't enough for God's love that he took on our humanity at the Incarnation. It wasn't enough that he died for us on Calvary and rose on the third day. He wanted to make it possible for us to draw our life from him by means of the Eucharist, by eating his flesh and drinking his blood, which he has given for the life of the world and for your life and for my life. Just as much as we survive off the food and drink we eat materially, so much more do we survive off the spiritual food he gives us, his body and blood in the Holy Eucharist. Therefore, we need to ensure that this Sunday's conversation is consequential in getting us to eat Jesus' flesh and drink his blood in a life-giving way, seeking to become whom we eat and draw our life from him in all aspects of our existence, just as he draws his life from the Father. And we also need to ensure that it's consequential in getting us to stake our whole life on what he affirms, that through this act of the Mass and our reception of Jesus in Holy Communion, Jesus will indeed give us eternal life by raising us up on the last day. May this Sunday's Gospel be consequential in all these ways. God bless you.
Thank you, Father Landry. To hear more from Father Landry, check out his website at CatholicPreaching.com, and you can also catch his writings at EWTN's own National Catholic Register. A big thank you to all our listeners for joining us. I hope that this show was helpful. I hope that it gave you more peace and more hope and more joy, and you go with our prayers.